Today I will answer 3 questions. First one would be about the left running and right running waves applied to oblique shockwave theory. The second question would be about why the flow is isentropic in the expansion wave flow structure. And the third question would be about the interaction of the oblique shockwave and the boundary layer. So what are the left running and right running waves? The shock waves could be generated when the geometry of the body changes. For example, we have a finite angle on which our flow would be reflected on the upper side, and on the lower side we would have similar behavior of the geometry. There are 2 points where our wall geometry changes. Each of these body shapes can generate oblique shock waves. One will go from the lower surface and another will go from the upper surface, and at some point these 2 shock waves would meet. As you know, existence of the oblique shock wave is defined by the following factors. We must have the supersonic flow velocity before the shock wave, and we must have an angle of the body compatible with this flow Mach number to form an oblique shock wave according to theta beta m relation. So if I write mathematically, I will see the following, that I have a function of theta beta m, where theta is the angle of the body, beta is the angle of the shock wave, and m is the Mach number before the shock wave. And this function connects 3 parameters, 2 geometrical parameters of the angles and 1 Mach number. If we place ourselves in the direction of the flow, for example, we will look to this direction. On our left we will have the left running shock wave, and on the right from us will be the right running shock wave. These left running and right running shock waves, they will meet at some point and they will reflect one from another. This reflection will also form so-called slip line, which will characterize direction of the flow after the shock wave intersection. Calculation of the flow properties in the region of the shock wave intersection can be done if we take into account the following conditions. First, if the pressure on the upper part of the reflected shock wave region P4 would be equal to P4 prime, where the region 4 is on the upper side and 4 prime is on the lower side. And the second, if the direction of the flow is the same, so the angle phi defined on the upper part phi4 would be equal to the angle on the lower side. Writing these 2 equations together with the theta beta m relation for upper and lower part of the flow, we can go out with a complete system of the equations, and we can calculate all the flow properties in region 4 and region 4 prime. Please let me know if you are really interested to understand this mathematical model of calculation of the shockwave interaction in this case, we could have an additional video and study this question. Answering to the second question, why the expansion waves are isentropic, we can reference to several publications on this topic. First of all, visualizing the expansion fan, we will see the following picture. We have a body with some sudden change of the geometry on angle theta, and then we start to have an expansion fan. On this expansion fan, we have a continuous change of all the flow properties. Mach number increases, and all the thermodynamic flow properties decrease. There is no doubt that this kind of flow is adiabatic, because we neglect the heat transfer between the flow and the wall. And also, since the flow is changing continuously, we do not see a high gradient of flow parameters. This flow is reversible. So it can go in one direction, or it can go in the other direction. Having these two conditions of adiabatic flow and reversible flow, we can conclude that this flow would be isentropic. Theory of an isentropic expansion waves is widely described in the literature. There is an analytical solution of such flow, and it was widely studied by the numerical simulation and by experimental research. All these studies shown that the concept of isentropic expansion fan is valid, and the mathematical model is showing to us very high calculation accuracy, since it's a result of an exact solution of the flow equations. The case of the boundary layer and shockwave interaction is very complex, is one of the most fundamental tasks in computational aerodynamics. For example, we have a flat plate on which the boundary layer is formed. This is the boundary layer and it's growing. On the other side, we have a physical body that is generating an oblique shockwave. Some body which has relatively small inclination angle, and it's generating a shockwave. I would like to remember you that the shockwave has a sudden change of all the flow parameters, including the thermodynamic parameters and the velocity. So the gradient of all parameters of the flow is very high. At some point, shockwave is hitting our boundary layer. At this point, all the flow properties inside the boundary layer start to change. First of all, a stagnation point and a flow separation starts in this region. So we can see a gradual increase of the vortex in this region. Since we start to have a vortex, the thickness of the boundary layer in the region of interaction with the shockwave also increases. So we can see such a bubble inside the boundary layer. Because of this bubble, we have changed the cross-section of the flow, and changing the cross-section of the flow answers to these changes and forms series of the compression waves. After the shockwave, we can also see change of the shape of the boundary layer that results also in a series of an expansion waves. All these waves at some moment reach an original shockwave and join with it, forming a strong shockwave that starts from another body, and then near the boundary layer separates to the series of the shock waves and expansion waves. Here, inside the central vortex, inside the boundary layer, flow velocity is very small, so we can observe the stagnation properties in this region, and we can observe also the reverse velocity in this region. Task of the boundary layer and shockwave interaction is one of the classical tasks on which any numerical model can be tested. There are many publications in this area, and some of them resulted in books. So we can find several nice books about boundary layer and shockwave interactions, which I will recommend in the description of this video.